Much better. Oh, this cord. I don't think I can do that right there. Because it keeps getting caught under it. Yeah. Alright, alright. Welcome to MidnightMan Play/Reads, where we either chill and play video games or read a nice erotic novel. I'm MidnightMan, the voice of midnight, and we are going to continue reading Tamed, a sci-fi alien warrior romance. And I will continue where I left off from Chapter 9. Alright, so I do hope you enjoy my reading today. And I'm out of coffee. If any of you guys know of a good sponsor for coffee, I'm definitely looking for them. If you want to support my endeavors of streaming and voice acting, you can donate a goo or two on Gucci, or subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Also, I have a Discord, so if there's any novel or visual novel that you would like for me to read, you can join my Discord, and you can put it on the... Where are you, Discord? On the visual novel recommendations channel on my Discord. Alright, now, let's get started. If she hadn't been making such a racket opening and closing drawers, she would have heard him enter the suite. At least, that's what Dorn told himself as he stood, watching the naked back of his maid as she pawed through clothing and muttered to herself. She was lean, with long legs and wet brown hair that spilled down her back and almost touched her small waist. Small enough for him to span with his hands, he was sure. But it wasn't her waist that had his attention. It was her ass, high and curved. He knew these humans were inferior beings, less technologically advanced, with a short-sighted view of the universe. But he couldn't deny that females were visually appealing. Before his mind could wander too far, she threw an armful of clothes in the air and they landed on him. He pulled a garment that seemed to be all strings off his head as she turned around and gaped at him. Dorn couldn't stop his eyes from drifting down to her pert round breasts with their pink nipples, and then farther to the neat, thin strip of wispy dark hair between her legs. He felt an unfamiliar throb of desire that he tried to push away, and he willed his nose not to warm. Pulling his eyes back to hers, he held her gaze. Although humans had smaller eyes than Drexians, and not as many vibrant colors, his mate's eyes were a deep shade of blue. He thought they were pretty, although he had only seen them blazing with anger like they were at that moment. She didn't blink for a second as her cheeks reddened. Then she scooped up the towel from the floor. "How dare you sneak up on me in my room," she shouted, wrapping a towel around her and jamming a corner under one arm. "How long were you watching me, you creeper?" "I did not sneak up on you," he said as he shifted his weight across his arms over his chest. "And this is not only your room, mate." Mandy held her towel tighter. Dang it. "Don't you call me that? And what do you mean this isn't only my room? Raina told me this is where I'll be staying until the... Well, she told me this is my suite." Dorn liked the flush of her cheeks when she was angry, which was probably a good thing for him, since she seemed to be angry a lot. Is Rena the vexing with the blue hair? The what? I mean, yeah, she's the one with the blue hair. She is vexling, he explained. One of the species working on the station. She was correct that this is your suite until our bonding ceremony, but it is also mine. That is why it's called the Fantasy Suite. Mandy cast a glance at the single king-size bed, draped in sheer white fabric. I gotta get a glass of water, hold on. Oh yeah, there we go. Mandy cast a glance at the single king-size bed draped in sheer white fabric. Oh, well, that still doesn't explain why you snuck up on me and watched me while I was naked. I did not expect you to be naked, Doran said. And I would have said something if you had not been so busy making a mess of your clothes. These are not my clothes, Mandy said, kicking at the pile of garments at her feet. I would never be caught dead in these things. Doran appraised the colorful yet flimsy garments littering the floor. They seem appropriate for the setting. I was led to believe humans wear small outfits at places like this. Oh my goodness. Mandy let out a sigh that told him she was exasperated with him. Some humans might have worn these clothes back in the 80s, but I'm not one of them. She stalked across the room. This is supposed to be some kind of dream experience, right? Everything a human tribute could ever desire? Well, this human tribute is not impressed. So you can tell whoever's in charge that they're going to have to step up their game if they want me to play ball. Doran narrowed his eyes at her. Play ball? Mandy stamped her bare foot. You know what I mean. Go along with all this. Pretend to be happy that I'm being pawed off to some alien brute as part of an intergalactic treaty. Suck it up because I have no choice. Doran absorbed her words and felt his ire growing. Alien brute? He was a warrior with a list of commendations and battle victories longer than his arm. Who did this female think she was to insult him like that? His race had battled across galaxies, protecting races weaker than them and maintaining the balance of power, while her planet was systematically destroying itself. It was foolish to think he could ever be compatible with one of these creatures. He started to turn and storm out of the suite when he remembered his brother and his duty to his family line. Instead, he abruptly turned back and took a few long strides so he was standing only inches from her. She backed up until she reached a wall, and he matched her steps until he was towering over her. He lifted her chin with one hand so she was forced to look at him. You're right that you have no choice, but neither do I. Neither of us want to be here, or wants to be mated to each other, but there is no alternative. So I suggest we make the best of it, or, as you put it, we suck it up. He dropped her chin and backed away. If it makes you feel any better, we will really need to lay eyes on each other. I command a ship on the outskirts and prefer to be fighting with my crew. He turned around to exit the suite and leave the infuriating human when a vase flew by his head and crashed against the far wall. He spun around to find Mindy red-faced and breathing heavily. What in the God's name are you doing? Your big plan to make me feel better about all this is to tell me that you're going to leave me? She reached for a small lamp on the side table. You're just like human men! What was wrong with this female? First, she couldn't stand the thought of being mated to him, and now she was angry because he promised her she wouldn't need to see him often. He didn't understand humans at all. Doran caught the lamp hurtling through the air before it hit the floor in his head. Stop this at once. You're behaving like a spoiled child. Gee, where have I heard that before? Mandy hiked up her slipping towel, and her gaze darted around the room as she clearly looked for something else to hurl at him. She ran to the bedside table and picked up a bubble bowl filled with shells. I hate you, she screamed as she hurled at him. I hate all of you! He lunged for the bowl and caught it, although several shells spilled out onto the floor. She wasn't making sense. and he wondered if his brother had purposely chosen a defective human with which to torture him. He knew warriors who mated with human tribute brides, and none of them had told stories like this one. He sat down the glass bowl and took long strides to reach her, stepping across the pristine white bed in his heavy boots and scattered the rose petals. He snatched both her wrists before she could find something else to throw. She was crying as she tried to pull her arms from his grip. "Let me go! You don't want me anyway! No one does! Let me go!" She struggled for another minute before he released her, and she threw herself to the bed and curled up in a ball, sobbing loudly. Doran stood motionless, watching her weep. He did not know what to do with a crying female, but he knew he was going to throttle his brother the moment he saw him again. His mate was clearly miserable at being matched with him, and after spending only a few minutes with her, he wasn't so crazy about the idea either. The only thing Doran could feel glad about was that he'd never have to worry about becoming attached to her. He'd known the Drexians to become enamored with their human mates and even claim to love them, though he found the concept absurd. He could never become attached to this spoiled earthling, and it was clear she would never feel anything for him but anger and resentment. She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. "Didn't you hear me, you big lug? Go away!" Doran stomped out of the suite. He'd be lucky if he didn't tie her up and throw her in the closet before the bonding ceremony. Nice. Chapter 10. That was quick. Doran slammed his fist down on the tiki bar and the bamboo roof shook. "A Nuvian whiskey. Make that a double." The Nebix bartender gave him an apologetic look. "Sorry, only tropical drinks here." He waved a hand at the decor and touched a finger on the collar of his shirt, which adorned with the garish flowers. "You could probably get a Nuvian whiskey in the officers' club on the command deck." "Too far away," Doran said, wishing he was on his dingy battleship instead of in the recreated biosphere with bright sun. The sound of waves lapping against the sand and strangely upbeat music being piped in. "Give me whatever's strongest." The bartender began pouring brightly hued liquids into a metal cocktail shaker, along with a scoopful of shaved ice. Doran thought that Nebix's floral outfit was an odd contrast to the short horns poking through his pale hair and the long tail swishing behind him. But then again, he found most things on the boat to be strange. "Make that 2, Cax said, as he took the bar stool next to his brother. Doran looked over him and grunted. "How'd you find me?" "An angry commander in full battle uniform storming through the South Pacific?" Cax gave him a crooked grin. "You weren't tough to track down." "Don't worry," Doran slumped over the bar. "You don't need to keep tabs on me to make sure I won't bolt. I have every intention of fulfilling my duty. It's just that my mate is impossible, and she hates me." Cax thumped his brother on the back. "I didn't come to make sure you weren't going to run. I thought you might need a little advice." The bartender slid 2 tall glasses across the bar, each decorated with paper umbrellas and swizzle straws coming out of the top. 2 tropical thunders." Cax raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on Doran, as Doran pushed aside the straw and umbrella and took a long drink, draining half of the glass in a single swallow. "Not bad for something orange," he said, wiping back his hand across his mouth. He twisted to face his brother. "So you're here to give me advice on women?" Cax shrugged. "While you've been stranded on the outskirts, I've been to quite a few of the pleasure planets." Doran shook his head. He was very aware of the planets that existed as escapes from reality. Places where the entire economy revolved around fun and enjoyment, and creatures that would never be appropriate or compatible mates, but who were very suitable for pleasure. He'd been to a few himself, but had found the encounters left him feeling hollow. You can't tell me how to handle a mate the same way you would a..." Cax took a drink and leaned in close. "It's not all different. We all want the same thing." Doran gave out a snort of laughter. "I assure you my mate does not want the same things I do. Unless she's hiding her lust for battle as well." A couple sat down across from the bar from them, the female giggling as she leaned in, leaned against the bare-chested Drexian man. Dorn felt a momentary stab of jealousy that he hadn't gotten one like that, giggly and easygoing. Earth females were known to be easy to handle. How'd he gotten one that was so difficult? Cax acknowledged the couple by raising his glass. The man nodded, straightening and putting a fist to his chest when he recognized the insignia of Dorn's uniform. Dorn nodded at the man, who dropped his fist but looked embarrassed to be so casual in front of a commander. All you need to do is give her what she wants, Cax said, putting Dorn's attention back to him. Females like to be spoiled. Too late, Dorn grumbled. She's already more spoiled than I could ever make her. Show her that you care, brother. Listen to her. Find out what she likes and what she dislikes. There's more to being a good mate than simply mating with her. Dorn made his brother's eyes. Am I the wrong brother for the job? Cax inhaled deeply. Unfortunately, you're the only brother for the job. The bartender switched out Dorn's empty glass for a new drink, this time without the straw and paper umbrella. I doubt you'll want to go through with it after our fight. Dorn pulled the drink to him and wrapped one hand around the hourglass-shaped container. I would not be surprised if she opted to live with the other tributes who rejected their mates. If she rejected the match, why would she be meeting with her wedding planner? Cax asked. Dorn sat up. She's moving forward with the planning? How did you know this? Cax held his palms up. I have my ways. Dorn did not understand females. How could his mate tell him she hated him, then just turn around and plan a ceremony where they would be bonded for life? This just proves my point. She's not rational. Cax threw his head back and laughed. Who said she had to be rational? Maybe she's more like you than you thought, and she likes a good fight. He elbowed his brother in the ribs. Maybe she was convinced by your ass that won't quit. Dorn gave his brother a side-eye glance. Whatever that was in that tropical thunder was starting to do his work. He felt a sense of contentment starting to spread through his body. Perhaps she did like the way he looked. After all, he was a notable warrior within a race already known for his size and strength. Before he'd taken up his post on the outskirts, many alien females had expressed their desire for him, and he had partaken in his share, although it had been nothing but release for him. You're right. He stood up, knocking the bar stool to the ground. I should give her everything she desires and more. Show her how lucky she is to be chosen as my mate. He ducked under the thatched roof of the bar and cast his eyes around the tropical setting. Where is she now? I believe she's on the promenade shopping for a wedding gown, Cax said. But maybe you should return to your suite and wait for her there. Nonsense, Dorn waved off his brother. I need to make sure she's being treated like the jewel she is. He swiveled his head around. Which way to the inclinator? As he stumbled away, Cax glanced back at the second empty cocktail glass and shook his head. Wow. Man, these chapters are short. I'm probably going to do more. Chapter 11. Mandy waited until she heard his heavy footsteps leaving the room. Then she sat up and wiped her eyes. She felt the same empty ache she did after all her episodes, as stepmother number 2 used to call them. Hurt, followed by anger, followed by tears, and the urge to lash out at whoever hurt her. In this case, the big alien who called himself her mate. Not that he'd want her now. She hitched in her breath. Hadn't he called her spoiled twice? It was one thing to hear it from her father and her stepmother. She expected it from them, but to hear it from someone who just met her? Maybe everyone in her life was right to drop her. Mandy looked at the broken glass and clothes strewn across the room. It sure didn't happen on episodes of The Bachelor, she thought, although it would make for great TV. Yoo-hoo! Raina's voice was accompanied by a knock only seconds before she walked in. I wanted to personally introduce you to Sergey. Her words trailed off. What on Vex happened here? Mandy scooted to the edge of the bed as Raina stared at the carnage. The man she assumed was Sergey was half Raina's height. and had perfectly round eyes and spiky purple hair. He wore a snug suit with wide lapels the same color as his hair, and for some reason, he reminded her of a circus ringmaster. Doran and I had an argument, Mandy said, trying to make her voice sound casual. Rena and Sergei exchanged a look before Sergei clapped his hands and stepped over a pile of clothes. This is in the past, sweetie. What matters now is getting you out of bed and ready for your appointment with the dressmakers. Good, Mandy slid off the bed. Because I can't wear these clothes. Rena began scooping items off the floor and stepping around the bits of broken glass. Well, you can't go to the promenade in a towel. I'm going out? Mandy touched a hand on her tear-stained face. Can't the dressmaker come to me? Rena and Sergei laughed as if she said something hilarious. You can't exactly say yes to the dressmaker if you don't try on these dresses. Rena shook her head. And there are too many to bring here. I'm going shopping for a wedding dress right now? She'd always imagined picking a gown that would be something she'd do with her mother and best friend, and then share as an Instagram story with her thousands of followers. She never pictured doing it with two funny-looking aliens. But didn't you hear me? Doran and I had a huge fight. I don't even know if he wants to marry me anymore. Rena and Sergei exchanged another knowing look and laughed. He'll marry you, Rena said. He's a Drexian warrior, and he will not go back on a commitment. How romantic, Mandy said under her breath. It wasn't like she had any better offers on Earth. A little voice in the back of her head reminded her. And at least this guy was honest. He wasn't pretending to love her, which was comforting in an odd way. Mandy knew what she was getting with him. A big, brawny husband who didn't love her and would expect her to love him. Coming from L.A., that was par for the course. Could be worse. At least he wouldn't break her heart. Sergei clapped his hands. Come on, you're moving slower than cream rising on buttermilk. Excuse me? Mandy said. Excuse me. Sergei loves using Earth expressions, Rena said as she fished a pair of lace paintings out of a drawer. Isn't that the Earth saying? Maybe somewhere on Earth, but not California. Mandy pulled on the panties under her towel. Our last bride was from the American South, Rena explained as Sergei strode to the door to wait, mumbling something about a herd of turtles. That would explain it, Mandy said. Rena handed a sundress and Mandy decided not to point out that yellow was not her best color. She stepped into it and shimmied it underneath her towel, then slipped the straps over her arms and let the towel go. Perfect, Sergei said, waving for her to join him. But I haven't done my hair or put on makeup. She never left the house without having her hair and face done. You never know when the paparazzi would be waiting to snap a photo, although that had been happening less and less. A pretty girl like you doesn't need it, Sergei told her. Besides, who do you know here? He had a point, she thought, stepping into the sandals Rena handed her and following her wedding planner out of the suite. They walked in along a teak wood path with other over-water bungalows jutting out on either side until they reached a sleek door with no handle. Sergei waved his hand over a panel and the door slid open. The Inclinator, my dear. Mandy glanced behind the door as she left the South Pacific and stepped into what appeared to be an elevator with curved walls and a soft purple uplighting. Sergei touched another flat panel, and she felt a small rush as they soared upward. Within seconds, the doors were opening again, and they stepped out into a pedestrian avenue lined with shops and restaurants, and even a stone fountain burbling with water. The air smelled of freshly mowed grass, and the sounds of people laughing and talking made her think of being back in Beverly Hills. She felt a mood lighten as women passed by carrying wide shopping bags with logos and braided handles. Hey, tasty snack, is that you? Oh. Welcome. doing what I call midnight reads. I read books on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and today I'm reading a book called Tamed, a sci-fi alien warrior romance. Yeah. Really? Well, it's kind of erotica, but you don't see any pictures. You see no pictures. This is the promenade, Raina said. You can find anything your heart desires here. She tilted her head back to look at the sky, expecting to see fluffy clouds, and her mouth fell open. The promenade soared at least 20 stories into the air, and spokes extended from the inclinator shaft they just exited. The ceiling, if you could call it that, was a clear dome, and Mandy could see the expanse of outer space as the entire station slowly rotated. Hold on. Uh-oh. Gotta put focus on the window. There we go. That's the first kind here. Oh, right on. Any lingering suspicions she had that the whole alien space station story was a ruse were quickly dissolving. Sergei took her by the elbow. But now we're focusing on the gown. Once we have that, the design for the wedding will fall into place. They kept to the brick walkway, although Mandy noticed the bricks were made out of something iridescent that glittered beneath her feet. Leafy trees sprung up from the planters every so often, and even swayed in a non-existent breeze. The South Pacific bungalow was breathtaking, but this was the kind of place where she felt at home. If she didn't pay attention to the soaring glass ceiling that looked out into a million stars. Here we are! Sergei stopped in front of a glass-fronted shop with double bay windows. Wedding gowns filled the displays, although they seemed to hover without the need for mannequins, and the words "Say Yes to the Dress" were written in gold on the black awning that extended over the door. Did they get absolutely all their information from Earth on TV? Not that it was the worst way to know what humans liked, but their alien interpretations weren't exactly on point. What's happening, Naughty James? How you doing? Sergei pushed through the glass door and a bell tinkled overhead. A pair of men rushed out, both in black Nehru-collared jackets that extend to the mid-thigh. One had metallic silver hair slicked back into a low ponytail, and the other had short hair that was so blonde it looked like spun gold. Both wore eye makeup that coordinated with their hair. They each took one of her arms and hurried into the shop, talking simultaneously. I'm Randy, but with an eye, and you're going to make a spectacular tribute. Look at that waist! The blonde's voice was high and chirpy. I'm thinking a ball gown, full princess skirt. The other man sucked in his breath. And failed to accentuate her long legs? She needs a mermaid silhouette. He winked at her. I'm Monty, also with an eye. Sergei pulled her away from both of them and sat her on a white upholstered settee. Why don't we ask the bride, what she likes? Nice. Mandy looked at the men as they stood attentively in front of her and thought back to all the celebrity weddings she'd seen. I love Vera Wang, but the new Vera, not the old. And I like tulle, but not like a ballerina skirt. More like the kind Nicole Kidman wore when she married Keith Urban. And I love detailing on sheer organza, like on Monique Lulliher gowns. The two men had not blinked once while she's been talking, but when she stopped, they both nodded enthusiastically and ran off in different directions. Isn't this fun? Rena asked as she handed Mandy a flute of something pink and bubbling. Mandy held up in the light from one of the many crystal chandeliers. This isn't champagne, is it? It's bubbly, Raina explained, looking at Mandy as if she were a simpleton and taking a seat on the other side of her. What's up, condom head? How you doing? Ooh. Oh, why my eyes going bad? Oh my goodness. Donate to my Patreon so I can see an eye doctor. Let me see. When in Rome, Mandy thought as she took a tentative sip. Then a longer one when she realized the drink tasted like a cross between champagne and strawberries. She sat down the glass after she downed half of it and her fingers started tingling. Raina produced a small tray of what appeared to be... Ooh. Thanks, condom head. I appreciate it, man. Because, oh my goodness. Where was I? I know, right? Every little bit helps, though. It's more than what I had. I'll tell you what. Raina produced a small tray of what appeared to be chocolate-covered strawberries. Thank you so much, condom head. Mandy took one, biting into the red fruit and swallowing a juicy mouthful. Okay, not strawberries. She examined the remaining bite of the fruit in her hand. Sweeter than strawberries and not as firm. Cheaty berries, Raina said, as if reading her mind. Are they dipped in chocolate or something else? Raina patted her legs and giggled. Of course it's chocolate. We know how much you humans love chocolate. Chocolate. Excuse me. At least I gotten that right. Mandy popped a bite of the chocolate-covered cheaty berry in her mouth and took another from the tray. These were way better than the nuts and raisins in her room. Monty emerged from the back with an armful of white, fluffy gowns so high his silver hair barely peeked over the top. He hung them on a nearby rack and took one and held it out to her. Lego mutton sleeves that are sheer to the fingertips and a peekaboo sweetheart neckline, he said, and waving a hand over the dress and causing some of the bumblebees to jiggle. Mandy raised both eyebrows at him. You're kidding, right? Monty's cheeks flushed, but he merely tossed the gown on the floor and slicked another. Fit and flare with lace overlay and sequins on the bodice. Or bodice. I don't... B-O-D-I-C-E. I'm not sure. He produced a pointed headpiece. The matching veil attaches to this V-shaped headband with a single pearl that drops down to your forehead. Mandy looked at Sergei, who was beaming at the hideous dress that she was convinced from an 80s sample sale. On the other side of her, Raina fanned her teary eyes. Okay, these are totally wrong, Mandy said, taking another chocolate-covered cheaty berry. They were stylish about 30 years ago, but no one today will be caught dead in them. Monty's entire face went purple, and he snatched up the remaining dresses on the rack and headed back to the shop. Hates them, he yelled to Randy, who was walking toward her with an equally high pile of gowns. Randy spun on his heels and followed Monty to the back. Not to worry, Sergei said. Just a minor hiccup. Clearly our R&D team hasn't been keeping up on the R. Apparently so. Mandy noticed Sergei's purple hair was now slightly pink at the hairline, and she blinked a few times in case she was seeing things. She reached for another cheaty berry, but was surprised to see she's polished off the entire plate. She guessed she'd been hungry. Rena handed her a fresh glass of alien bubbly and patted her knee. This'll help, hon. Mandy didn't realize she finished the first glass, but felt grateful for the sweet drink. Instead of making her feel tipsy and then belligerent, like champagne did, it made her feel like she was drinking happiness. She drained half the glass, then put an arm around Rena. What would I do without you? Sergei leaned across her and shot Rena a look Mandy didn't understand. And you? And you? Mandy put an arm around Sergei. What would I do without either of you? You want to be my new best friends? Oh my God, they got her lit! Before either alien could answer, Dorn walked into the shop. The tall, uniformed Trexian looked completely out of place in the frilly boutique, with its white walls and glittering chandeliers and piped-in love ballads from the 90s. His scowl flickered when he spotted Mandy. I keep forgetting 30 years ago was 1990. Oh my gosh. If that don't make you feel old. Sergei leapt to his feet and hurried over to intercept Dorn as he strode across the shop toward him. What a pleasure to see you, Commander. Your bride is selecting her gown for your wedding. Dorn cleared his throat. I want her to have anything she wants. Has she found something she likes? Not yet, Raina said, standing. It seems our styles are a bit awful, Mandy said with a hiccup. Most hideous things you've ever seen. There's no way I'd ever walk down the aisle in any of them. Monty appeared again with a single dress, his face no longer flushed. He held it over his arm to give a full view of the shiny satin skirt, but hadn't opened his mouth when Mandy made a face. It's blinding me, she said, and held a hand up to her eyes. Monty stalked off and Randy took his place, his face much less triumphant than it had been at the beginning of the process. He held the dress up by the hanger and didn't say a word. Mandy inspected the simple ivory gown that appeared to made of silk with an overlay of sheer netting. Now this one is also not good enough, Dorn interrupted her. I thought I made myself clear. Only the best for my bride. If she can't have the best, then she shall have nothing at all. I would rather her walk down the aisle naked than in a dress that's not worthy of her. That seems a little extreme, Mandy said as Raina gasped. Nonsense! Dorn pulled her up by the wrist and began marching her out of the shop. I will not have my bride insulted like this. Mandy looked back as he dragged her out and saw all four aliens watching him, wide-eyed and slack-jawed. Sergei's hair was almost entirely pink, with only the tips remaining purple, and Randy had dropped the one decent dress on the floor. Wow. Okay. Chapter 12. That was a bit rude, don't you think? Mandy said as Dorn opened the door to the suite and pulled her inside with him. She'd been known to get irritated with sales staff, and especially with waiters who got their order wrong. But Monty and Randy had actually found a dress she didn't despise. Too bad Dorn had dragged her away before she could try it on. I only want the best for my mate, he said. Isn't that what you want? Isn't that what you're used to? Mandy didn't know whether he was being serious or sarcastic. Did Trexians have a sense of humor? The room had been cleaned since she left. There were no traces of glass on the floor, and the vase she smashed had been replaced with an identical one, I bet, filled with white orchids. The duvet Dorn had walked across had been changed out so boot marks no longer marred the surface, but now there were no rose petals. All traces of those had been removed. Dorn turned to face her, stepping so close she had to drop her head back to look at him. He unhooked a small device from his waistband and placed it on the bedside table. Take off your dress, he said. What? He must be joking, Mandy thought, taking a baby step back. You heard me, mate. He closed the gap between them. Remove your dress. If you think we're going to... Just because I agree to... She glanced over her shoulder at the door. I'm not... He slipped one finger under the spaghetti strap of her sundress and slid it over her shoulder. His eyes locked with hers. Mandy's mouth went dry, and her brain told her to make a run for the door. Unfortunately, the rest of her body felt like jelly, and a shiver went through her as he slid off the other strap. She stood motionless, her breath shallow and quick, as he used both hands to pull the dress down. Her body. She knew she should protest, but she was also lost in his eyes, and lost in his eyes as she was unable to speak. No man had ever looked at her so intensely, and it made her all her logic and reason fly out of the window. Ew. I believe it's getting spicy. When the yellow fabric lay pulled at her feet, she stood in front of him in nothing but panties. He took her hands and moved her forward until she stood nearly flush against him. She could feel the heat of his body, and even touching his hands and sent tremors through her. His eyes burned with desire as he bent down, and she closed her own eyes, ready to feel his lips against hers. Instead, he dropped her hands, and she heard him scooping up the dress on the floor. She opened her eyes and watched him carry the dress out to the balcony and toss it into the water. "What are you doing?" "That rag was not worthy of you," he said, returning to the room and making a beeline for the teak wood dresser. He opened the drawers and grabbed handfuls of clothes she previously tossed on the floor. "Aren't these the garments you didn't like?" She opened and closed her mouth, aware that she wore nothing but a pair of sandals and lace panties. "Yes, but..." He marched back out to the balcony and threw them into the aqua blue water that surrounded him. "You're right. You should not have to wear garments you don't like." She stamped one foot on the wooden floor. "So what am I supposed to wear in the meantime?" He turned and appraised her. "I'm fine with you, just like that, mate." "I'll bet you are." She shot him a look, furious that he'd left her with nothing to wear, and that he'd led her to believe he was seducing her when he was really tricking her. She stomped into the bathroom and pulled the towel off the rack, wrapping it around herself as she walked back out. He faced away from her, leaning against the teak wood railing of the balcony and watching the clothes drift away. "It's too bad you did not prefer those garments. I'm sure some of them would have looked nice on you." She took a long breath and tried to calm herself. Two could play this game, she thought, as she joined him on the balcony. "I would not want to wear anything that doesn't please you, Doran," she said in the voice she heard her mother use every time the woman had wanted to get something from a man. Doran turned, looking startled by her apparent changed mood. "Really?" She nodded and placed her palms flat against the hardness of his chest. "Tell me what you like, big guy." He stared down at her for a long moment, then brushed a strand of hair off her face. "I like when you do not fuss with your hair or face. You are attractive without all of that." Mandy faltered, blushing from the compliment. He really thought she was pretty without makeup or her hair done. She reminded herself that she was on a mission to give him a taste of his own medicine. She wiggled her hips and her towel dropped to her feet. She leaned into him, feeling his hardness pressing against her stomach. "So you like me best without anything at all?" His hands went to the sides of her hips, and he made a low noise in the back of his throat. "I'll take that as a yes." Her voice was a purr as she ran her hands over the sash that crossed his chest as part of his uniform. "I think it's unfair that you're wearing so much more than I am. Why don't we fix that?" He unhooked the sash and threw it over a nearby lounge chair. "Much better," she said, raking her hands through his hair and pulling him back a few steps. "Wouldn't want to ruin it now, would we?" His hand slid up from her waist, his thumbs tracing the curves of her breasts as he followed her. "This is perfect," she said, tugging his face to hers. His eyes were molten, and she almost lost her nerve as she felt her knees begin to weaken and her body warm. The moment before their lips met, she pulled back and grinned at him. "Turnabout's fair play, don't you think?" His eyebrows pressed together in confusion as she pushed him hard and he stumbled back, losing his balance on the stairs and leading into the water and splashing into the ocean. Mandy picked up her towel and fastened it around herself. "Oh, wow." As she watched Doran flail in the water. "That'll teach you to tease me." He spluttered and waved his arms for a minute before his head disappeared under the water. She watched him sink below the turquoise surface, and a thought hit her like a punch to the gut. The guy couldn't swim. Shit! Did she just drown the guy that she's supposed to marry? She imagined the punishment for murdering one of the Drexton's best warriors would not be kind. She cast her gaze around desperately, but there was no one on any of the other bungalow balconies and not a lifeguard in sight. Double shit! You can do this, she said, peering at the big man sinking farther away from her. She'd always been fascinated by shows about people being rescued by paramedics on firefighters, and a secret part of her always thought it would have been a cool thing to do if she hadn't grown up in L.A. and been the daughter of a big shot. She'd even taken a lifeguard course, although she never tried out to be a lifeguard. Well, now was her chance to see if she had what it took. She dropped the towel to the floor before sucking in a huge breath and diving into the water head first. The coolness of the water was a momentary shock to her system, but once Mandy began moving her arms in rhythmic strokes, her muscles warmed. Luckily, the water was so clear she could easily see Dorn as he floundered beneath her, waving his arms and kicking his feet uselessly. How could someone who was so much of a badass as him not know how to swim? He reached the sandy bottom before she did, his impact kicking up a soft cloud of white sand. Mandy gave a few more hard kicks to reach him and hooked her arms just under his armpits so she could bring him up. She reversed course and began kicking up, but his weight jerked her back down. She seemed enough for him to know that he was solid muscle. But was he really so heavy? What happened to being weightless in water? After her lungs began to burn, Mandy tugged again. His boots didn't even leave the sand, although his eyes were now closed and his head lolled back. That's not good. She looked back down at his boots. Of course, with their thick soles and metal hardware, they must weigh a ton. She fought the urge to take a breath and scissored her legs until she reached his feet. She ripped back the metal chaps and pulled off the boots, then wrapped an arm across his chest and powered them both to the surface. With barely a second to gasp for breath, Mandy scooted up to the stairs of the balcony and dragged Dorn behind her. Once he was mostly out of the water, she tipped his head back and began CPR. Grateful she actually paid attention during the lifeguard course. Her heart pounded as she blew air into his mouth, tasting the salt on his cool lips. "Please don't die," she whispered when she came up for air herself. "You may be a jerk, but I know you don't deserve to drown." She gave his chest 5 hard pumps before blowing into his mouth again. When she pulled her head away, he coughed and spewed out a mouthful of water, spraying her in the face. Mandy wiped the droplets from her eyes. Okay, I deserve that. As she watched his eyes flutter open, relief flooded her body. She'd done it. She actually saved someone. Along with a feeling of pride, Mandy felt a warmth in her chest she couldn't explain. She also didn't know where she wanted to hug Dorn or hit him. It was official. She'd never met a more infuriating and confusing man in her life. Wow. Hydrate, motherfucker. There we go. Second bottle. Chapter 13. Dorn coughed and spit out a mouthful of water, the salt burning his throat. He opened his eyes and blinked a few times, but all he could see was Mandy's face, inches from his. He held up a hand to shield himself from the water dripping on his face from her wet hair. "Oh my God!" Her pinched face relaxed. "You're alive! For a second, I thought you were a goner." "You tried to drown me." His voice came out a hoarse croak that wasn't more than a whisper. Mandy let out a huff. "How was I supposed to know you couldn't swim? Who doesn't know how to swim?" Dorn slowly raised himself up on his elbows. "Maybe someone who grew up in space?" "Yeah, I guess that would do it." Mandy sat back, her eyes not leaving him. "I don't know if you should be moving around so soon. You were under there for a couple of minutes without breathing." He put his fingers to his temple. That explained the dull pounding in his head. You weren't sure if you wanted to save me? She crossed her arms over her chest, which he realized was still bare, and made a face at him. No, for your information, I jumped in as soon as I realized you were sinking like a rock. It took me a while to drag you up. You have about 100 pounds on me, you know. She leveled a finger at him. You're lucky I went through that phase where I wanted to be on Baywatch. I would be lucky if I had a mate that didn't want me dead. He looked around. He looked down at his uniform. The wet fabric plastered to his skin. At least she hadn't taken off his. At least she had taken off his stash, so that wasn't ruined. I don't want you dead. If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have pulled you up from the bottom and then up to these stairs. Dorn realized he wasn't lying on the teak stairs leading from the balcony into the ocean, and that his feet were still in the water. That's why it's so uncomfortable. It was harder to drag you once you were out of the water, so I got you as far as I could, then started mouth to mouth. Dorn arched an eyebrow. He did not remember her lips being on his. I'm sorry I was not awake for that part. The corner of her mouth twitched up. Well, you didn't miss much. Me blowing air into your lungs isn't very sexy. His eyes drifted to her lips. Bow-shaped and pink without anything on them. The bottom lip plumper than the top. He fought the urge to touch them and see if they were as soft as they looked. His eyes wandered south to her wet, naked body. Her panties transparent and plastered to her skin, and he felt heat return to his core. She must have noticed his gaze because she reached for a towel and hugged it around her. I only wanted to give you a taste of your own medicine. He tilted his head at her. He must have been under longer than he thought because she wasn't making any sense. You wanted to give me medicine? It's an expression, she dropped her eyes. I wanted you to see what it felt like to be teased and then ignored. Now you understood. Ah, you did not like when I undressed you, but did not mate with you. Color filled her cheeks, and she stood quickly. No, that's not it. She stamped one foot. Men are impossible. He could hear her going inside and walking around the suite, muttering to herself. He sat all the way up and pulled his feet out of the water. Where were his shoes? He used the wooden railings to hoist himself up and then peered down on the ocean floor below. They were there. His military-issue boots were sitting side by side on the white sand at the bottom, and brightly colored fish swam around, inspecting him. Great. He'd need new boots before he could return to his command. Water pooled around his sock feet as he walked into the suite, leaving a trail behind him. Would you mind telling me why my boots are underneath our bungalow? Mandy stopped storming around the room. I had to take them off to get you up. They weighed a ton. She threw up an arm. Shouldn't you be grateful I saved you instead of nitpicking about your stupid boots? You wouldn't have had to save me if you didn't push me into the ocean in the first place. He heard his voice rise. She glared at him. And I already told you I pushed you in as a joke and to give you a taste of what you did to me. It seemed like someone can dish it out but can't take it. You're angry that I made you want me? Now he was yelling. Is that it? You think I do not want you back? Her cheeks flamed and she balled her fist. Who said I want you? The only reason I'm here is because I have to be. It's either marry some big jerk, she waved a hand at him, or go to work somewhere where the other reject brides. So don't be flattered I picked marrying you. It's not like I had a better option. That makes two of us who don't have any other options. He unbuttoned his soaking shirt and tossed it out of the balcony. He noticed her eyes drop to his exposed chest, and her mouth fell open a bit. What are you doing? She asked, backing up as she took a step toward her. He undid his belt and pants and stepped out of them, kicking him outside with his shirt. What do you think I'm doing, mate? Her grip on her towel tightened as she stared slack-jawed at him, standing in nothing but snug-fitting black underwear. The white towel barely reached to the top of her thigh as one ass cheek peeked out the back. He took in her long legs and the soft swell of her breasts above the towel, and felt his cock harden. The nose that ran down his spine heated and sent pulses of warmth through his body. It had been too long since he felt more than his own hand on his shaft, and being only feet away from a dripping wet female, his mate no less, made him throb with desire. He peeled off his underwear and took another step toward her. When her eyes dropped to his erect cock, she made a strangled sound and loosened her grip on the towel, catching again before it fell off completely. She stepped back until she hit a wall, meeting his gaze, her eyes challenging him. He'd seen the look of defiant longing before, and it made him want to take her right there, pressed up against the wall, with her legs wrapped around him. He closed the remaining distance between them and pulled her towel off in a single move. "I'll scream," she said, but her voice was soft and breathy. "I'll scream." He bent down, leaning close enough to her neck to inhale the scent of salt water on her skin and feel the heat that betrayed her. Her nipples were hard and brushed against his chest, making him growl low and deep. "I would like to hear you scream, mate." Her breathing, fast and shallow, told him she was more aroused than angry. But not now. He stepped back and bent over from the waist, wrapping a towel he'd taken off her and around his hair and proceeding to rub it vigorously. Then he flipped himself up, sending a few droplets of water across the room, toweled off the rest of his body, and tossed the towel over to the closet rattan chair. "Right now, I need to recuperate from my near drowning." He left her with her back pressed to the wall and her mouth open as he crossed to the four-poster bed and climbed underneath the duvet. As he closed his eyes and tried to steady his own racing pulse, he hoped his mate did not try to kill him while he slept. Holy shit. Oh, man. Whew. And now we are on chapter 14, which I will continue next Tuesday. Whew. Well, looks like that wraps it up for Midnight Reads. Tune in tomorrow for Fall Guys Fridays on Plexstorm, Gushi, YouTube, and Twitch. If you want to support my endeavors of streaming and voice acting, you can donate a goo or two on Gushi, or subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Also, I have a Discord. That link is in the description as well. Take care and see you tomorrow.